Karen demands VIP table, claiming to know the owner, but I'm the owner, and she was left crying with a $4,000 bill after my revenge. Karen storms into the restaurant, screaming that she knows the owner and that we must give her and her group of pals the VIP table reserved for celebrities. The trouble is, I own the restaurant and have no idea who this lady is, but I decided to play along and see what happened. During the dinner, one of the girls asked me whether I thought my life was meaningless because I worked as a waiter. That's when I realized all baits were out, and I was going to exact my retribution. This is what I did. This occurred around Christmas and New Year's. My grandparents immigrated to Canada from Italy in the 1970s and established a restaurant. When they died, my parents took over the restaurant, which they grew and enlarged throughout the decades. I've been working at the restaurant since I was 15. As my parents became older, they retired and became snowbirds, spending the winters in Florida. They sold the restaurant to me a few years ago, but they kept a tiny percentage of the stock as a supplementary source of income in addition to their savings. As soon as I took possession, I modernized the old place. I rebuilt the restaurant, altered the logo, and contacted local and national newspapers to place advertisements. I invited food critics, bloggers, and vloggers. It was slow at first, and I began to fear that the loan I took out to undertake all of this was the worst mistake I'd ever made, that I had ruined 3 generations of a family company. But soon, it began to work. A local semi-YouTuber included us in one of his videos, which prompted more people to visit and review us. Even on a Monday, we were quickly seeing 5 to 10 times the regular volume of activity. We became a destination for large events, and it was not uncommon for a celebrity to stop by on certain evenings. I even invited certain high-profile clients to visit and cook for our guests. This cost a fortune, so we were completely filled for the holidays. People had to make reservations in July to get a table in December. It took years to get to this point. When things became busy, I didn't simply sit in the back office. I was on the floor doing whatever needed to be done, whether it was greeting customers, bussing tables, or mopping the floors. On nights with high-profile guests or events, I wore a jacket and took charge. One night, 6 women walked in. 5 of them appeared to be in their early 20s, with a leader looking to be in her mid-20s. My best assumption was that she was an elder sister of one of the females, or an older sorority sister to incoming college students. I was greeting them at the entrance, and as they approached, Queen Bee Karen was telling the baby Karens how fantastic this restaurant is, how delicious the cuisine is, and how there might even be celebrities there. When she approached me, she explained that she required a table for 6. I responded, "Of course, can I get the name on the reservation?" She stared at me and responded, "Oh, I didn't make one, but it's okay. The owner is a personal friend of mine," he said. "He always keeps 1 or 2 tables open for special guests, and we can have one of those tonight." This is true for many high-profile restaurants, and I've been doing it recently as well, but I had no idea who this woman was, and she had never discussed any of this with me. I understood she was attempting to get in without a reservation, but she had chosen the worst person to try this with. I told her, "I am sorry, but we cannot seat anyone without a reservation. As you can see, we do not have any seats available." I didn't want to go all out and say, "I'm the owner, and we have never spoken before, so I never promised you anything," but I didn't want to embarrass her in front of the other girls she was with at the time. She then instructed one of the other girls to take a picture of me. She announced that she would speak with the owner and ensure that I was either scrubbing toilets or fired by the end of the week. The other girls behind her joined in, saying things like, "Yeah, kiss your minimum wage job goodbye." I wasn't sure if they were in on it with her, or if they truly believed she knew the owner. Queen Bee Karen then said, "Look, you can either give us a table, or I can make your life very difficult. This is not worth losing your job." She kept pointing, trying to belittle me, and then saying things like, "Obviously, you aren't anyone here, because if you were, you would know who I am and never try to tell me anything other than yes or of course." She was constantly attempting to put me down and take that table. At this time, it had been a hard day for me, and from my perspective, I had 3 options. Number 1, I could inform her that I am the owner and call her out on all of this. Number 2, I could simply hand her the table and let things go. Or third, I could teach Queen Bee Karen and her minions a lesson. I selected option 3. I smiled at her and said, "Of course, ma'am, please follow me." I handed her one of the 3 tables we leave free in case a celebrity walks in, which occurs occasionally. I told her, "I apologize for everything, and you're right. It would be simpler for us to give you the table." I also assured her that the first 3 rounds of drinks would be free. I seated them down and personally served them as they sat. I told them, "We need one of your credit cards and IDs just to keep on file, and we'll return them to you before you leave." Queen Karen handed me her card and informed the baby Karen minions, "Tonight is on me." I took their orders, gave them their free beverages, and informed them that due to how busy we were tonight, the meal may be delayed. The females only worried about the free drinks. They ordered 3 rounds and still hadn't received any food. They eventually called and asked me to check on it, all while giving me the worst attitude since they arrived. I told them I would look into it, but also asked if they wanted additional drinks. They ordered 2 more rounds. They were sozzled by the time the appetizers arrived, having done nothing but drink on an empty stomach for the majority of the night and just eating salads. As more food arrived, more beverages were ordered. What these girls didn't realize was that they were at our VIP table, which normally costs a few $1,000s to sit at, but I didn't charge them for it. Thus, the menus were different. Prices are not displayed on these menus. This is a restaurant industry trade secret. They also offered higher-end menu items, such as white truffle black caviar meals and specially imported West Coast oysters, among others. At one point during the night, I honestly began to question what I was doing. I worried I was going too far with these poor girls. They might not know any better. But certain things encouraged me throughout the night, such as when one of the baby Karens questioned whether I thought my life was pointless because all I ever became was a server. Also, one of the staff told me that they were planning how to mess with me, believing that they could do so whenever they wanted, and that I would always give them a table. I overheard them say, "He's cute, but I wouldn't date a waiter like that. He is such a pushover." There were other comments like that throughout the night, so I continued with their life lesson. By the end of the night, each female had built up a bill ranging from $500 to $600. I handed Queen Karen the bill for $423.23, which included tax and tip. I've never seen somebody sober up this soon. She went from smiling and giggling with her buddies to almost in tears. She immediately summoned me over and asked whether this was a joke. I took the bill, looked it over, and apologized. "I'll get you the correct bill amount again." She seemed completely relieved, assuming she had received someone else's bill, and called me an effing idiot, before continuing to talk to her pals. When I returned to give her the right bill, she flipped out again. "Is there something wrong on this bill that you didn't order?" She and the girls were stunned and went over every single line of the bill, including the initial several lines that listed their original 3 rounds as complimentary. They then got out their phones and went over everything 100 times, adding it all up. Queen Bee, visibly startled, just remarked, "1 second, I need to use the restroom." Part of me feared she'd dine and dash and leave the baby Karens with the tab, but I discreetly reminded her that we had her ID and credit card without making it too obvious. I was concerned that she would run out of money. 10 minutes later, she returns with new makeup, clearly crying, and tells me all about how poor the food was, how dreadful the drinks were, and so on, demanding that I at the very least cut the cost in half. She went on to say that the baby Karens would help, despite the fact that she had previously informed them that the night would be hers. Then, as if a light bulb went off in her head, she brought up her alleged relationship with the owner again, as if it would give me extra motivation to lower the amount in half. I smiled as I told her, "No, simply no. I can't change the bill." She takes out her phone and shows me a series of text messages from someone named after my restaurant, followed by the word owner. I instantly grasped what she had been doing in the bathroom, most likely changing one of the other Karen minions' contact names and erasing prior texts to establish this new script. I reviewed the messages and clicked on the contact information before telling her, "That's not the owner's cell phone number." Her response was, "He has multiple phones for business. Of course, you do not know all of his numbers." I replied, "How about this? If we call him and he says it's okay to take 50% off the bill, then I'll do it." Her response was to begin ranting and screaming. which drew the attention of the few remaining patrons, and I knew it was time to finish this. I told her, in a less conciliatory tone, "Cut the crap. Little girl, you do not know the owner. You've never been here before, and if you continue ranting, I'll call the cops." Her tone changed as she attempted to defend herself as best she could. My response to her lame retort was, "My grandfather established this restaurant. My family has been running this establishment for centuries. I've worked here for nearly my entire life. I am the sole owner of this restaurant, and I have never seen you, heard of you, or made any promises to a stranger have never seen before tonight." The little Karens were frozen and had no idea how to react. Queen Bee was in tears. I added, "Now, I provided you the table you wanted, one of these particularly reserved tables for high-end clientele, which I did not charge you for, as well as 3 rounds of free drinks. If you do not pay your account, I will call the cops and give them your identification." Karen signed the bill in tears, and the tiny Karens reached into their wallets to hand her whatever cash they had, which was probably a couple hundred, with a promise to repay her more. 2 days later, an angry man arrives at my restaurant and requests that one of my bartenders talk with me. I was in the back office working, so he had to wait for about a half hour. She was with him too, but she kept her head down. I took them both to my office and showed him highlights from the security cameras, which had particularly high-quality audio because they were in the VIP area. We needed to keep good records in that region due to previous unconnected accidents. I showed him the majority of it, their remarks, orders, everything. When all was said and done, he rushed out with her yelling at her the entire way. I have not seen or heard from any of them since, but the initial bill I gave them, which did not include the $120 oysters, is framed on my desk. As a side note, I did not lose as much money on the table in 3 rounds of drinks as you might expect. The table was intended to be empty anyway, so I didn't lose anything because I hadn't expected to gain anything in the first place. The cost of the meal and other drinks more than compensated for the loss in the first 3 rounds, so now that you know everything, am I the jerk? Probably the most astonishing thing about the Karens in this situation, aside from the money trying to muscle their way into securing a seat and avoiding paying the bill, was their perspective on the world. That solitary statement concerning the OP's original poster's inadequate performance as a waiter definitely stood out. It seems that Op was going to loosen up on his entire vengeance plan, but then one of the baby Karens asked him if he felt his life was meaningless because all he had become was a waiter. That has to be one of the most insanely entitled viewpoints we've ever seen on this channel. It may not be as exciting or insane as some of the other stories, but the fact that she actually sees the world in this way is simply sick. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a job, regardless of the income. This occurs frequently with jobs, such as janitors, and I despise it when individuals believe they are superior just because they do not work in those positions. There is nothing wrong with becoming a janitor. I don't understand that mindset, but in this situation, she not only feels that way, but she also wants to mock him for doing a difficult job such as being a waiter, or at least, that's what she believes he's doing. One more thing. I'm happy this story ended on a somewhat gratifying note, with the father attempting to reverse the situation, but becoming more enraged with his daughter than the restaurant owner. The only thing that scared me out was that the restaurant was recording audio of the folks sitting at that table. I would probably avoid going to a restaurant if I knew my talks were being recorded. Anyway, I'm glad it worked out for the Op, but please tell me how you would have handled the matter if it were your restaurant and these were your customers. Was the Op a jerk or not, and why? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My mom abandoned me when I was a kid, and now she disrespects my wife for not understanding her struggles. I, 38 male, when I was 10, losing dad felt like the universe had suddenly tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a quiet, peaceful kind of passing. It was abrupt, shocking, the kind you replay in your mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. He was there one day, his laughter filling up our small living room, and then he wasn't. The details around his death were messy and painful, too much for a kid to really grasp, but enough that the memories just sort of stick with you. Mom took it hard, really hard. She tried to hold it together, but you could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hands shook a little more each day. She wasn't the same after that, none of us were. Our home felt like a completely different world, one where the colors had faded and the sounds were muffled. Mom, who used to be the heart of our house, filling it with warmth and laughter, suddenly seemed like a shadow of herself. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coffee she'd poured but never drank, lost in thoughts that clearly pained her. I remember the morning she told us about her decision to move back to her home country. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside her. Our house, once vibrant with our family's daily routines, felt increasingly empty and silent. The walls echoed with the ghost of our past conversations, and each room held a memory of Dad's laughter or his comforting presence being there. Mom said being there was too much of a reminder of what we'd lost. She needed space to grieve, away from the environment that echoed his absence. "It's just for a little while," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need some time to heal, to find some peace." The word temporary hung in the air, but as a kid, I didn't grasp the full weight of what was happening. I just nodded, thinking she'd be back soon, that this was just a short break and everything would go back to normal. Mom's move, intended to be a brief escape from her grief, became a permanent arrangement. Her brief visits were filled with awkwardness and a palpable tension, as if she was a guest rather than the mother who had raised us. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the struggle to reconnect with the children who felt more like strangers now. As weeks turned into months and then years, the reality of her prolonged absence settled in. Birthdays and holidays came and went without her. Phone calls were our only bridge, her voice becoming less familiar over time, strained with a sadness that didn't seem to fade. Each call was a reminder of the widening gap between our old life with Dad and our new reality. After Mom left, it was the Nelsons who took us in. They were old family friends, the kind who had known us since we were in diapers. Mr. Nelson was Dad's college buddy, and Mrs. Nelson had been Mom's maid of honor. They tried to fill the void as best they could, turning their guest room into our new bedroom, stocking the fridge with our favorite snacks, and even trying to keep up the same holiday traditions we used to celebrate as a family. Despite their kindness, the house never quite felt like home. It was always a bit too clean, a bit too quiet, lacking the chaotic warmth that had filled our own home. At night, the walls seemed to echo with the silence, a stark reminder that this wasn't just a sleepover, that our mom wasn't going to be back at the end of the weekend. I remember lying in that guest bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to my sister breathe softly in the bed next to mine. She seemed to adapt better. Or, she just hid her feelings more. Nights were the hardest for me. That's when the what-ifs would haunt me. What if I had been less of a hassle, quieter, easier to handle? Would Mom have stayed if I hadn't been so much like Dad, as she often said I was? These thoughts would spiral, and I'd find myself gasping for air, feeling that old familiar pang of abandonment. Mrs. Nelson would hear me sometimes, her soft knock on the door a prelude to her sitting by my bed, whispering reassurances, trying to soothe the fears and doubts that gnawed at me. But no matter how gentle her touch or kind her words, they couldn't replace the comfort that would have come from my own mom's embrace. This experience shaped how I parent my own kids. I've always made it a point to be there for them, to be a constant presence in their lives. I've gone overboard at times, maybe being too protective, too present. I want them to feel secure, to know I'm always there no matter what, because the absence of my mom, her choice to distance herself when we needed her most, left a void in my life that I've sworn never to replicate in theirs. It's tough sometimes knowing that Mom was just grappling with her own grief while trying to find a way to cope. I understand it on a rational level, but emotionally, it still stings. Accepting her decision has been one of the hardest parts of growing up, and even now, it's a struggle not to let that old resentment color the love I still have for her. My wife, a wonderful woman, we married and have 2 wonderful children together. I met my wife in college, a stroke of luck that I still thank my stars for. We had both chosen the same dreary morning lecture, Economics 101, and it turned out the only thing more potent than our mutual disdain for the subject was our instant connection. She sat next to me on the first day, her presence a stark contrast to the monotonous tone of the professor. She had this way of scribbling notes that was almost artistic, her expressions flickering between amusement and exasperation. We started sharing notes, then coffee, and eventually our dreams and fears. Telling her about my family came later, when our casual coffees had turned into long dinners and we started thinking about a future together. It was a summer evening. One of those perfect ones where the air is just cool enough to be comfortable. We were at a little park near campus, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold. I felt the weight of my past nudging at me, urging me to open up about everything. I started with the good memories, my dad's roaring laughter, the way he used to scoop me up into the air, my mom's holiday cookies, and the noise of a house that felt full. But then I shifted to the harder truths. I explained how things changed after Dad passed away, how the brightness dimmed, and how Mom eventually moved away. I told her about the years of feeling adrift, being raised by family friends who were kind, but couldn't fill the void my mom left. My wife listened quietly, her hand finding mine as I talked. Her eyes never left my face, and in them I saw a well of empathy and understanding. When I finished, there was a soft sigh, a slight light squeeze of her hand around mine, signaling her support. She didn't bombard me with questions or pity. Instead, she shared her own story of loss, how she grew up without grandparents and much of her extended family, which made her feel isolated in a different way. That night, I realized how much I needed someone who didn't just know my joy, but also understood my pain. It felt like a burden had lifted. Sharing my past with her, and her acceptance and understanding of my family's complicated dynamics only deepened my feelings for her. It was then I knew she was more than just a partner. She was my ally, someone who would stand by me through the complexities of life. Ever since I shared my family history with my wife, there's been this unspoken tension hovering around the subject of my mom. My wife, being the incredibly supportive partner she is, has always been understanding about my feelings, but has harbored a certain reluctance towards my mom herself. It's not out of malice or disrespect. It's more about her struggle to reconcile the abandonment I felt as a child with the woman she's met a few times since we got married. I've tried to explain to her that my mom was just trying to cope in her own way after my dad's death. She was grieving, lost without him, I'd say, hoping to bridge the emotional gap that my mom's departure had created not just in my life, but now in our marriage too. It wasn't that she didn't love us, she just needed time. But to my wife, who sees the world through lenses tinted with fierce loyalty to family, the idea that a mother could leave her children in the care of others, regardless of the circumstances, is a pill too bitter to swallow. She's never rude about it, never dismissive of my ongoing relationship with my mom. She encourages me to call her, supports my trips back home to see her, and she's always the first to suggest we send gifts on Mother's Day. But she remains distant, a polite coldness setting the boundaries of their interaction during family gatherings or holiday dinners. When my mom is around, my wife is cordial but distant. She smiles, engage in small talk, but there's a guardedness in her eyes, a firm line drawn that everyone seems to understand. I'm here for you, she whispers to me, squeezing my hand under the table, a silent reassurance that her stance isn't meant to hurt me, but a boundary she sets for herself. It's a delicate balance, navigating this quiet standoff between them. I often find myself in the middle, an interpreter translating not just words but emotions and unspoken thoughts. I tell my mom she's just fiercely protective of those she loves, hoping to soften her hurt at my wife's standoffish demeanor. To my wife, I gently remind that my mom has her flaws, but she regrets those years away, trying to kindle empathy in the ashes of past grievances. This dynamic, though far from ideal, has become a part of our life's rhythm. My wife's steadfast support of my relationship with my mom, without choosing to engage more deeply herself, speaks volumes of her respect for me, even if it's a compromise she silently bears. It's a silent testament to her strength and her deep understanding of my need to maintain that fragile thread with my past. Recently, I decided it was time for another trip back to my home country to let the kids spend some time with their grandmother. My wife couldn't make it due to her demanding job, and while she encouraged us to go, I could tell she was relieved not to face the tension that usually accompanied these visits. I explained the situation to my mom when we landed, and she nodded, saying she understood, but her disappointment was palpable. The first few days were a blur of activities. My mom went all out, taking the kids to local parks and museums, filling our days with laughter and stories, almost as if making up for all the missed time. In those moments, watching her with the kids, It was easy to forget the complex layers of emotions that usually clouded her visits back home. The evening had started off well enough. We were at my mom's house, my aunt's laughter echoing through the kitchen as she cooked, the smell of spices filling the air, a reminder of so many childhood meals. It felt good to be home, even if home now had the bittersweet edge of missing voices and past grievances. My mom and my aunt, they've always had this way of making even the simplest meal feel like a feast, and tonight was no exception. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, just family sharing stories and catching up. The kids, exhausted by the day's adventures, fell asleep almost as soon as their heads hit the pillows. I kissed them goodnight and headed downstairs, where my mom and aunt were in the kitchen, glasses of wine in hand, ostensibly relaxed. The murmur of their conversation greeted me as I approached, but it was my wife's name that caught my attention, halting my steps. "She thinks she's too good for us," my aunt's voice floated up. Tinged with resentment, there was a clink of glass, probably my mom nodding in agreement as she added, "Yes, but don't bring it up around him. She's a snob, but it's not worth the argument." It stung, hearing that there, in the dim light of the stairwell, a knot tightened in my stomach. My wife has always been meticulous about how she interacts with my family, careful never to flaunt her background or make anyone feel less. She'd go out of her way to connect, to show interest in their lives, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. Her reticence at times, I knew, was out of a fear of overstepping, not a feeling of superiority. Hearing my wife referred to in such terms by my own family sparked a heat in my chest that was hard to tamp down. I lingered on the stairs, unseen, the familiar ache of being caught between the people I loved surfacing once again. They continued, oblivious to my presence, airing grievances that were usually spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. I wrestled with my emotions, debating whether to confront them or retreat. The decision was made for me when my mom glanced up and caught my eye, her expression shifting from surprise to something like guilt. The conversation snapped off, replaced by a tense silence that filled the room like smoke. "I heard what you said." I found myself speaking, my voice sterner than I felt. My aunt tried to brush it off, saying it was just a slip of the tongue, but the damage was done. The air was thick with unsaid things, with years of miscommunications and hurt feelings. I explained, maybe more sharply than I intended, that my wife had never acted superior, that she simply prioritized her career and our family's well-being over everything else. My wife grew up in a world quite different from mine, born into a wealthy family. She was the only child, the sole focus of her parents' affection and hopes. Tragically, her parents passed away when she was still in her teens, an event that thrust her into premature adulthood. They left her everything, their sprawling estate, significant investments, and various other assets. Despite the wealth and responsibilities that fell on her shoulders at such a young age, she never let it define her. Instead, she channeled her energies into her studies and later her career, proving to everyone that her achievements were born of her own intelligence and hard work, not just her inheritance. She enjoys the finer things in life, sure, the kind of luxury she grew up with: high fashion, gourmet foods, vacations, and far-flung destinations, but she carries it all with a grace and an ease that's devoid of arrogance. She's unapologetic about her tastes, yes, but never ostentatious. In contrast, I come from a solidly middle-class background. My family's world was smaller, our means more modest. We valued hard work, simple pleasures, and close community ties. Our house, always filled with warmth and laughter, was humble but happy. This stark difference in our upbringings was never lost on me, and initially, I worried about how my family would perceive her or she them. Despite these differences, my wife has never behaved superiorly or looked down on my upbringing. She's been nothing but respectful towards my family, always engaging in conversations, offering to help with meals during visits, and bringing thoughtful gifts that showed her attention to what they might appreciate, not just expensive items for the sake of display. Yet the underlying class difference sometimes creates an unspoken tension, especially with my mother. Mom, with her down-to-earth values and no-nonsense approach to life, has sometimes struggled to connect with my wife's world. Though my wife has made every effort to bridge the gap, ensuring she doesn't flaunt her wealth or make my family feel uncomfortable, there's always been a subtle, perhaps imagined, barrier there. This difference in backgrounds is sometimes amplified by the innocuous comments at family gatherings or the slightly too long glances at my wife's designer clothes and accessories. I know it comes more from a place of unfamiliarity and perhaps a bit of envy, rather than any real disapproval, often downplaying her lifestyle and focusing on the many things we all have in common. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, the frustration evident in my voice. It was clear they hadn't intended for me to hear their words, and my mom's face fell, an apology forming on her lips. My aunt, ever the more confrontational, didn't back down. "She doesn't mingle with us like she's one of us because she thinks she's better," she stated bluntly, her eyes challenging me to contradict her. That hurt. It hurt because it wasn't true. "That's not it," I replied, my voice firm. "She's trying her best. Just because she doesn't always know how to show it doesn't mean she feels she's above us." "You're misreading her caution as contempt." My mom, softer, more apologetic, tried to soothe the rising tension. "We're just not used to her ways, that's all." "Maybe we misjudged her a bit," she conceded, her eyes avoiding mine. But the damage was done. The evening's warmth evaporated, replaced by a chill that no amount of familial bond could easily dispel. I sat down with them, trying to explain further, sharing how my wife had often expressed her worries about not fitting in, about being seen as an outsider. It was a long conversation, one filled with admissions and reluctant understanding. My aunt listened, her expression showing defiance. They clearly didn't expect me to hear any of it, and my aunt said that my wife's refusal to interact with them is because she thinks she's better than them. I explained that is not the case, but my aunt kept pushing the issue. Eventually, my mom said it was fine if my wife felt that way, but I shouldn't defend her classist behavior. At this point, I snapped and said that my wife resents my mom because she wasn't around when I was a kid. My mom and aunt didn't say anything to that, and I went back upstairs. After the conversation with my mom and aunt, the house felt colder, quieter. I needed to clear my head, so I stepped out onto the back porch. The night air was crisp against my skin. Pulling out my phone, I sent a quick text to my sister, hoping she could offer some perspective. She's always had a way of seeing the middle ground, even when emotions ran high. Her response came back almost immediately, a testament to how often she played mediator in our family. "Just apologize to mom and aunt, okay? It's not worth the fight." That was just like her, always advocating for peace, even if it meant swallowing your pride. I stared at the phone, her words glowing in the dim light. It wasn't that simple for me. I didn't hold a grudge against mom for the choices she made when we were kids. I understood that they were made under the weight of immense grief. But hearing her and my aunt speak so dismissively about my wife, as if her efforts to fit in and respect their ways meant nothing, stirred a defensiveness in me I couldn't easily quash. It wasn't just the words themselves that had cut deep. It was the realization that these conversations had probably happened before. Not just tonight, that my mom and aunt had likely shared these thoughts between themselves, painting my wife in a light that was so far from the truth it felt like a betrayal. Not just to my wife, but to the efforts we'd both made to bridge our very different worlds. Sitting there in the quiet of the night, I typed out a response to my sister. "I get what you're saying, but it's not just about making peace. They don't see how hard she tries, or how their words might make her feel unwelcome." I didn't expect my sister to fully understand. Her approach was different, shaped by her own experiences and personality. I knew I would eventually to address this with mom and my aunt to clear the air, or at least to make my stance clear. But I also knew an apology from me wouldn't fix the underlying issue that my family still held onto preconceived notions about my wife, notions that weren't fair or accurate. The house was quiet. The only sounds the occasional distant bark of a neighborhood dog and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The conversation with my mom and aunt had left a palpable tension hanging in the air, thick enough to choke on. Alone in the small guest room where we were staying, I replayed the evening's events over in my mind, each word and sharp glance looping endlessly. In hindsight, I could see where I might have approached things differently. Maybe I could have been calmer, more diplomatic, instead of letting my emotions get the best of me. But in that moment, hearing them talk about my wife like that, someone who had tried so hard to be part of this family, despite feeling like an outsider, it felt like an instinctive need to protect her had overridden everything else. My wife wasn't just my partner. She was the mother of my children. The person who stood by me unconditionally. Defending her wasn't just a reaction, it felt like a duty. I leaned back against the headboard, the mattress creaking slightly under my weight. The room was filled with old family photos and knickknacks, a stark reminder of the deep roots and history my family had in this place. It made my decision even more difficult, knowing that leaving early would be like admitting defeat, like letting those petty comments drive us away. But staying felt untenable too. With every forced smile and careful conversation, and thus adding layers to an already thick facade, the kids were asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the grown-up complexities clouding the air around them. I didn't want their memories of this trip to be marred by a sense of underlying conflict or to feel the tension that I was so acutely aware of. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through it aimlessly for a few moments before I made the decision. I'd booked flights for us to go back home earlier than planned. It wasn't just about escaping an uncomfortable situation. It was about preserving the peace and mental well-being of my family. My wife, who hadn't even come on this trip, deserved to know that her feelings were validated, not just by words, but by actions. As I looked up flights, I realized this was more than just a logistical change. It was a statement. I wasn't just leaving early. I was making it clear that while family was important, the respect and well-being of my immediate family, my wife and kids, came first. She's not opposed to the idea of visiting my home country and has done so in the past. Her job is just very demanding, and she said she'd rather do a longer trip with the four of us. We have 2 kids when she can arrange more time off, and the trip isn't solely based on seeing my mom. My wife's relationship with my home country, and especially with my family, is complicated to say the least. She's not against the idea of visiting. In fact, she's joined me several times before, but her job in corporate law is demanding long hours, constant deadlines, high stakes. That kind of pressure doesn't pause for anything, not even family trips across the globe. She's practical about it. She told me once, over a late dinner while the kids were already in bed, that she would rather wait and take a longer trip together with the 4 of us. If we're going to travel that far, let's make it a real vacation, not just a quick visit, she had said. Her logic was sound. It wasn't just about the travel time, but also about the opportunity to truly relax and enjoy each other's company without the shadow of obligations or past tensions lurking in the background. The last part is crucial because the trips to see my mom have often been tense. It's nobody's fault, really. It's just that their worlds are so different, and my mom has this way of making her opinions known in a manner that's a bit too straightforward for my wife, who is accustomed to the more measured, polite exchanges of her professional world. So, this time around, when the opportunity came for me and the kids to visit my mom, my wife encouraged us to go while she stayed behind to manage a major case at work. She framed it as practicality, not preference. Go have fun with your mom. The kids miss her, and it's important they spend time with her, she had said, kissing me goodbye as we headed for the airport. She's always been clear about boundaries. If my mom were to visit us, she would welcome her with open arms, offer her the guest room, cook her meals, and engage in pleasant conversation. There's no animosity, just a preference to avoid situations she knows will be uncomfortable. This isn't just about personal comfort, it's about maintaining peace, about ensuring that, when we do spend time together, it's quality time, not just obligated time filled with awkwardness and forced conversations. My wife has always been very composed about her feelings towards my mom. She isn't the type to harp on things unnecessarily. Early on, back when our relationship was shifting from serious to truly committed around the time of our engagement, I asked her point blank about her hesitation towards my mom. It was a quiet evening, just the 2 of us, cleaning up after a quiet dinner at home when I broached the topic. Her response was straightforward, devoid of any malice. She explained that the unease stemmed from my mom's long absence in my childhood, which to her signaled potential complexities and family dynamics she'd rather not entangle herself with more than necessary. She wasn't judgmental about it. She just laid out her feelings with the kind of clarity and foresight she applies to most things in life. It's about ensuring we have less stress in our interactions so we can enjoy our time together as a family when it happens, she had said, her tone even but firm. That conversation set the tone for how things would be, and true to her word, she hasn't brought it up unless absolutely necessary. Over the years, becoming a parent myself has opened my eyes further to her perspective. The thought of not being there for my kids, of leaving them prematurely, is unbearable. The desire for stability and presence. It's clarified for me why my wife places such a premium on these qualities, and it's helped me appreciate her stance, even if I don't always fully share her reservations. Update. It's been a few months since I made my post. After reading your comments, I realized it would be rash to leave without trying to sort things out. So, I had a conversation with my mom the next morning, when my aunt was out and my kids were still in bed. The morning after the tense conversation with my mom and aunt, I approached my mom for a private talk. The house was quiet, with soft light filtering through the curtains, casting a calm over the living room where we decided to sit down. I could tell she was apprehensive about the discussion, perhaps worried about more confrontations. I started by apologizing for my outburst the previous night. My tone was firm yet conciliatory. I wanted to clear the air, but also to stand by my wife's perspective, which I felt was important to communicate clearly. I'm sorry for how I reacted, I began, but we need to talk about why you think it's okay to say those things about my wife. My mom nodded, her expression one of regret mixed with a hint of defensiveness. She listened as I reiterated that the comments I overheard were hurtful and simply not true. If there are issues, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the past decades. I understand, but you need to see where I'm coming from, too, she responded. She then explained how isolating it was for her after my dad passed away, how she needed to be around her own family back home to grieve. It wasn't about escaping from you or your sister, she insisted. I listened, trying to bridge my understanding with her experience. I get that, Mom, and I don't think anyone faults you for needing support, I said. But my wife sees it differently. She can't understand leaving kids behind during such a critical time, regardless of the grief. My mom bristled slightly at this. It's unfair for her to judge my actions from back then. She wasn't there. She didn't see the pain I was in. Her voice broke a little, her eyes conveying the turmoil of those days. You and your sister don't hold it against me, do you? I shook my head, trying to reassure her while also explaining my wife's point of view. We don't resent you, Mom, because we love you, and we know you did what you felt was necessary, but you have to understand that my wife views family responsibilities differently, especially now that we have our own kids. The conversation moved slowly, with pauses that were filled with unspoken thoughts and regrets. I stressed that my wife's feelings were valid, just as her actions had been to her at the time. It's not about right or wrong, I concluded. It's about understanding each other's perspectives and finding a way to respect them. I can't make my wife forgive you, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the frustration building inside me. And I need you to stop speaking poorly about her. It's important you tell Aunt Jane to do the same. Mom listened, her expression a mix of understanding and helplessness. I'll do what I can. You know I will, she replied. But then she added, but I can't control what your aunt says or does. She has her opinions. This response frustrated me further. But don't you see, it's not just about opinions. It's about respect. If there's talk like that going on, it creates an environment I don't want around our kids. It's not just about us adults. It's about what kind of example we set for them. Mom nodded slowly, seemingly understanding the gravity of my concerns, but she held firm on her stance about my aunt. I'll talk to her, I promise. I'll try to make her see. But you know how she is stubborn and I can't openly criticize her. She's helped me through a lot. The room fell silent for a moment as I processed her words. The sunlight streaming through the window cast long shadows across the floor, a stark reminder of the day moving forward. While we seemed stuck in this impasse, I looked at my mom, seeing the years of strain etched into her face, realizing that her relationship with her sister was just as complex as any other family dynamic. I understand she's family, I finally said. I'll do my best, she repeated, her tone more assured this time. No one should feel unwelcome in my home. Things weren't going anywhere, so I told my mom I was going to go home early. She got upset and defensive, and I realized she would also keep bad-mouthing my wife, unless when I wasn't around. That was the final straw. I went back upstairs and got flights for the next day. I sent my wife a text saying we'd be home early, and I'd explain when I got back, but everyone was alive and healthy. She said that she was looking forward to it and asked if I wanted to call. each of us carefully navigating around the tension that had settled in the air after our talk. The house, usually filled with the comforting smells of home-cooked meals and the sounds of casual family chatter, now felt unnaturally quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break the silence. As we packed up our things, the kids obliviously chattered about the trip, unaware of the undercurrents swirling around them. They were excited about going home, talking nonstop about showing their mom the souvenirs they had picked out for her. I tried to match their enthusiasm, but my mind was preoccupied with the conversation I'd had with my mom and the unresolved issues it left hanging between us. Finally, with our bags packed and the car loaded, I went to say goodbye to my mom. She stood in the doorway, her posture tense. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "When will I see you and the kids again?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. I took a deep breath, knowing my answer would be difficult for her to hear. "Mom, I want you in our lives, you know that. But things need to change before we come back. My wife deserves to be treated with respect, and I can't justify bringing the kids into a situation where that might not happen." The words hung heavily between us. Mom looked down, nodding slowly. "I understand," she murmured. "I'll work on things with your aunt, I promise." Her voice was sincere, and I believed her intent. But the reality of the situation was more complex than just promises made in the moment. "I hope so, Mom, because we miss you. But I need to put my wife and kids first," I continued, trying to keep my tone gentle yet firm. It was essential for her to understand that, while I cherished our family ties, I couldn't compromise on the values I wanted to teach my children about respect and kindness. Mom reached out, pulling me into a hug, a bit of the old warmth returning momentarily. "Give them my love," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Tell them Grandma thinks about them every day." As I got into the car and drove away, the image of my mom standing in the doorway lingered in my rearview mirror. When I got home, the sense of relief was palpable after the tension of the last few days. Walking through the door to see my wife and the familiar surroundings of our own space was grounding. She greeted me with a hug that seemed to physically lift the weight off my shoulders. The kids were already asleep, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background. We settled down in the living room, her on the couch with a cup of tea, me in the armchair across from her. She waited patiently as I recounted everything that had happened, my conversation with my mom, the awkward silence that followed, and the strained goodbye. When I told her about what happened, about the comments my mom and Anne had made, she let out a small laugh, more out of resignation than amusement. "Well, I'm glad I only got upgraded to a snob," she said. "Riley, it could have been much worse." Her attempt at lightening the mood was appreciated, but her eyes were serious, concerned about the impact of what had transpired. "I stood up for you," I said, wanting her to know that her dignity was something I defended unequivocally. I made it clear that we couldn't just brush those comments under the rug. She reached across to squeeze my hand, her smile warm. "Thank you. That means a lot to me. Not just that you stood up for me, but that you're thinking about what this means for us as a family." The conversation shifted then to what the future held for my relationship with my mom. I told her we need some space. I continued that I still want her in our lives, but our immediate family has to come first. My wife nodded, understanding the difficulty of the decision. "I support whatever you need to do," she said. "Just know that, whatever distance you need to put, I'm here for you. We're in this together." Her words were reassuring, reinforcing that the choices I was making were not just my own burden to bear, but something we navigated together as partners. "I think it's the best thing for now," I concluded, feeling a bit more confident in our path forward. "It'll give everyone some time to reflect and hopefully heal a bit." She smiled that same reassuring smile that had seen us through countless other challenges. "I'm proud of you," she added. "It's not easy standing up to family, but you're doing what's best for us." That's what matters. Charged visit to see my mom, and life at home has settled into a comfortable rhythm. The kids are thriving, oblivious to the adult complexities that sometimes shadow the edges of family life. My wife and I have found solace in the normalcy of our daily routines: work, school runs, weekend soccer games. Despite the undercurrents of that trip, our home life feels solid, anchored. I've made it a point to keep in touch with my mom, dialing her number every couple of weeks. but each call seems to resurrect a bit of the tension from our last visit. Her voice often carries a tightness that wasn't there before, and our conversations are punctuated by long pauses where words used to flow easily. It's clear she's still processing the boundaries I set and perhaps feeling a bit isolated by them. My sister, who has always been the peacemaker in the family, tells me during our own calls that she's keeping up her regular chats with Mom. She mentions that Mom feels judged, not just by what happened during our last visit, but by the enduring echo of her past decisions. She's still hurting, my sister explained one evening, her voice laced with concern. She feels like everyone's holding her grief against her. I listen, and I try to understand. Grief is a strange, malleable thing that touches everyone differently. I hope, with time, their only living grandparent, I'm acutely aware of the need to protect my wife's emotional well-being. She's been incredibly supportive and understanding, but I know the situation has been hard on her too. The balance is delicate, trying to navigate these waters without tipping anyone overboard. Since becoming a father, especially towards my wife, watching her as a mother, seeing her dedication and the boundless love she pours into our children, I find myself constantly amazed and grateful for her presence in our lives. The thought of losing her, of my kids facing life without their mother, sends a cold shiver down my spine. It's something I can't even bear to think about for too long. This fear, this visceral reaction, it helps me understand why she's so sensitive about family matters and why she's been so adamant about setting boundaries with my mom. It's not just about past grievances or discomfort. It's about ensuring our family unit remains stable and supported, no matter what. Reflecting on this has also given me a fresh lens through which to view my own childhood. I forgive my mother for her choices during our most difficult times, decisions made while she was engulfed in her own sea of grief. I know that she did what she felt was necessary to survive emotionally, even though it meant being physically distant from me and my sister. Forgiveness, however, doesn't erase the understanding of the impact of those decisions. It doesn't wipe away the fact that those choices left marks, shaping how I view relationships and responsibilities. This empathy I hold for my wife, stemming from our shared parenting journey, makes me think about how I would feel if the roles were reversed, if it had been her parents who had left her in a similar situation. Honestly, I doubt I could easily forgive such an action. The mere idea stirs a protective instinct in me that is fierce and uncompromising. I would want to shield her from that kind of pain, just as I try to protect our children from any hurt or unnecessary hardship. This is a theme in many conversations between us, sometimes late into the night, when the world is quiet, and it's just the two of us sharing our thoughts and fears. These discussions are sometimes tough, but they're always cathartic. They bring us closer, aligning our understanding and approach to how we manage our relationships with our extended family. Thanks for all your advice. For those of you who said I should get therapy, I am doing fine, but thanks for the concern.